chicken parmesan made from flour? That's right, we're gonna be using flour and water and we're gonna make chicken parmesan. Well, it won't really be chicken, it'll be chicken, or as some people say, but it'll be a plant-based meat called seitan. Well, let me just get into it and I'll show you how we do it. I'm using King Arthur all-purpose flour in a really big bag, so it's gonna make a lot of noise, okay? You need 2 cups. That's about 240 grams for those of you who are using metric. I do usually prefer to weigh my flour using grams. However, in this case, the exact weight really isn't all that important. To that, I'm gonna add 1 cup of water. Do you have to be exact? No. You do not want to use self-rising flour for this. You will have very unexpected results that you will not appreciate. And now we mix, which means I have to go get something to mix it with. Be right back. Okay, you just want to mix this together and make a dough, you know, because that's how this all starts, as a dough. You might think it's a lot like making bread, and well, you wouldn't be that far off because we are going to need it too. Don't worry if it's a little too dry or a little too wet. You just want it to come together into a dough ball. That is the key. So if you need a little bit more water, feel free. If it's a little too wet, you know, add a little bit more flour. Ideally, you want to use a flour that has a high protein content. This one is 11.7. I know their bread flour is like 12.3 or 12.6, something like that. It's a little higher because really what we're going to do is we're going to wash away everything but that protein, that gluten that's in here. So, one word, if you are gluten sensitive or have celiac disease, you want to skip this one. Just don't even try. There's not another way to do this using this method, so sorry, this one's just not for you. But everybody else, this is a really good thing. Okay, once it's starting to look like a dough, I'm going to take my very clean hands and get everything off this spoonula. I love the spoonula. They're so awesome. It's a spoon, it's a spatula, it's both. And I'm going to get in there and start kneading it. Now, I'm using a glass bowl so you can see what I'm doing in here, sort of. I want to get all the dry off the sides. I mean, you paid for it, you added it in there, you want to get it in there. And it's part of the dough, so you want it all in there. Okay, in getting mine going, it felt a little bit too wet, so I added probably another 1/4 cup of flour, and it's okay. I'm just going to keep working that in. But at some point, what you want to do is move all the extraneous stuff out of your way and get a surface that you can knead on. So I'm going to just dump everything right out, get my scraper. If you don't have these, get some. Oh my God, game changers.
I will have those included in the description and the link below.
The basic gist of this is we're going to remove all the starches in the flour, and we're only going to be left with the proteins or the gluten. So this is actually a lower carbohydrate food. Go figure, we're making it from white flour, right? But it's because we're washing away most of the stuff that is the carbs. Not that carbs are a bad thing necessarily, but this is a very refined product. So we're refining it even further. And now I want to start kneading it. And I knead it for a good 5 to 10 minutes. You want to really activate the gluten in there. Now, if you're using a higher strength flour, then it'll be a little bit easier to get going. And resist the urge to add vital wheat gluten to this to up the protein content. It's not going to be as effective. And vital wheat gluten does introduce a slightly different flavor. So that's why I like both methods. This, for me, makes a much better chicken than vital wheat gluten does. Vital wheat gluten, if I'm going to be using something heavy with spices like a sausage or even a beef-like thing, that's when I can get away with vital wheat gluten. But for chicken that has such a light, delicate flavor, I tend to like the washed flour method a little bit better. And the texture on it comes out very much like chicken. And I'm just giving this the quick knead, you know, where I just kind of press it through like I do with bread. Some people say, this is just rolling it. Well, if you look, I'm actually stretching that dough. It sticks to the board just a little bit, and it is being stretched. And as you can see, it's forming gluten. All right, once you've kneaded that for several minutes, and you have a nice silky smooth dough ball that's, you know, stretchy, bounces back a little bit, feels pretty good. It's kind of like making bread. Now we want to wash this flour. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some water and pour it into that bowl. Just dump it all right in there, but it's probably got to be opened. Oh, look at that. Now this is also the first part to something else that you can make with this. In other words, there's the gluten, but there's also the starch. The starch has its uses too. So I'm doing this in a bowl so I can save the first wash water. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. As soon as I put this in, you're gonna see it'll start turning milky. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of massaging it under the water, okay? Just rubbing it a little bit, pulling it and stretching it slightly. Not anything too hard, but a little bit of, treat it like taffy, kind of, you know? You're stretching it, you're rubbing it a little bit, pulling it, and what's happening is all the starches are washing off. Crazy, huh? Kind of reminds me of playing with Play-Doh and stuff when I was a kid. I don't know if I ever put Play-Doh in water though. And usually it takes a couple of washes, but on the first one, I go until this is like thick, like when it feels like full fat milk. That's pretty much how far I will go. And I'm gonna save that water because that'll have the most starch in it. But that's for another video. All right, so here we are after a few minutes and you can see my dough ball is just falling apart. That is normal. That's actually what we're after. But you can start to see some strands forming in it. That's the gluten. The lumps in the middle is actually starch, and they kind of work to our advantage. This is not a carb-free product because I don't tend to wash it 100% fully. I like to leave some of those starch granules in there. It gives a little bit of like a fatty feel, and it aids in the texture and flavor dramatically. So at this point, I'm gonna say my first wash is done. So what I wanna do is pull this out, and it's in pieces. I want to strain out as much of that liquid as I can, just kind of squeeze it without squirting it all over the place. And see, it'll go right back together again. It's really like the craziest thing ever. And there's all these little pieces in the bottom. You get those out. By the way, this is just how I do it. There's a million methods to wash the flour. There's so many ways. Seitan is really amazing. It's very ubiquitous. It's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. People have been making it. Really cool stuff. I happen to really like it. It's not necessarily Derica's favorite thing in the world. She tolerates it because I make it. Okay, so this now needs to go into a pitcher of some kind. I like to use something that's a little tall because what's going to happen is I'm going to put this aside, probably in the fridge, and what'll happen is all the starch will settle to the bottom and clearer liquid will stay at the top. And like I said, that's another video. We're gonna make bacon with that. So cool stuff, right? All right, so that was wash 1 done. Many people do 3. I tend to do 2 because like I said, I don't really wanna wash this 100% of the way. I don't wanna get rid of all that starch. So I'm just gonna give this another quick little wash here. I like to have some of those lumps of starch. You know, chicken has a little bit of fat to it, right? I mean, white meat chicken is boring to me. If I'm gonna recreate a meat, I might as well make something that tastes good. So I like dark meat chicken. It won't really be dark, but you know, it'll be close enough. And I'm not going too super crazy on the second wash. I want it to have that, it'll look like brains, okay? It just does. But it's gonna fall apart again a little bit. And you see the water went white, but it's not as thick or as milky as before. I know a lot of people will wash this like crazy. I'm just not doing that. Now this also makes about 2 cutlets. So if you need to make 4, obviously you want to use 4 cups. So like a cup of flour and a half cup of water makes roughly 1 cutlet. Okay, so now we have our basic washed seitan, also known as brains at this point. It's just weird looking, okay? So I'm gonna put it into a big bowl. If I was to cook this as it is, it would come out with a nice texture, but it might not taste very good because it just doesn't really have much flavor, okay? There's just not much there. So I wrote down a whole bunch of stuff that Derek is gonna tell me to put in here.
Is that additional moisture that's in there okay?
There's a little bit of additional water in here because it just keeps draining out. It's all right, don't worry about it. This is gonna cook and sit for a while, so it's all good.
So, as in most of our recipes, we're gonna have a teaspoon each of garlic powder and onion powder.
Shocking. Garlic powder and onion powder in the same recipe? And again, I'm not really measuring. I'm just gonna do my thing, dump it in like that. That's about a teaspoon. This is to taste. You can put in more if you want to. I wouldn't put in a lot more. Next.
1/4 cup of nutritional yeast.
This is not really optional. You definitely want to add this. If you don't have it, go get some. They sell it almost everywhere now.
An interesting thing that we found in adding nutritional yeast to our seitan is that it actually helps not only with the flavor, but the texture. 1 teaspoon mushroom seasoning.
Now, this is something that I got from Sauce Stash. Well, I didn't buy it from him, but I got the idea from him. And we get it on Amazon. It's actually really good stuff. You can also just take mushrooms, dry them, and grind them up. What is it, teaspoon?
Teaspoon.
It adds a nice umami flavor to the seitan.
And last, but certainly not least, is one of our favorite purchases from the Asian market.
Yes, if you can't find this in the Asian market, you can skip it, or you can use any chicken-based, chicken-flavored broth, okay? Like a bouillon cube or something like that. There's a lot of salt in these, so that's where a lot of our salt is actually coming from.
And that's why we're only going to use half of a teaspoon.
Yeah. But when you open it up, it smells like chicken. It really does. It's amazing. And I'm just using that much. Comes with a little tiny scoop and everything. I didn't open it up, but it's a little spoon. See? It's a little foldable spoon. I don't even bother unfolding it half the time. Okay. Next step is we want to mix that through. Now, normally you can throw this into a food processor and you can do it. I'm just going to try it this way. I have mixed it by hand before. It's a little more time consuming this way, but you know, I don't want to make you have to get a million things dirty, and it's not really a huge amount, so it shouldn't be too bad.
But if you have a food processor and it's easily accessible, by all means, just toss this in the food processor and let it go.
Yeah, ours is over there behind some stuff because we had to move things to film, and I don't feel like getting it out. So I'm using the dough scraper to cut the dough up into pieces as I'm doing this, and it does help to get all the stuff in there. Seems to be working pretty well. When you use a food processor, it gets very homogeneous. Doing it this way, it's not going to be quite as homogeneous, but it still works. Now also, as I'm kneading, let me show you what I'm doing. I'm putting it down and stretching back. It's creating more strands. That's going to make more grain or like a shreddable texture to the chicken. It seems to work really, really well. Okay, the next step, we got to cook it. Okay, so now we have our burner and a pan. I have it actually heating up. Our burner goes to 5, it's at like 3 1/4. If you're at home, please do this on the stove. It's going to be so much easier than what I have to go through to do this. This is a non-stick pan. It's one of those, what do they call it, granite ware or something like that. Any non-stick pan will do. I do it in cast iron too, so it's all good, not really a problem. What I want to do though is get a little bit of oil in that pan, and you really do need oil. This stuff will stick if you don't. Not a lot. I mean, I'm just using a tablespoon, tablespoon and a half. And there's a neat little trick because we're going to simmer this afterwards. All that oil that's getting on there probably won't even make it into the seitan itself. So is it really a problem? I don't think so. So we have our mixture, and it actually starts to get firmer as it sits. What I want to do is cut that in half. It doesn't like to cut very nicely, and it likes to stick back. It's like an amoeba. It just comes right back together again. So
he's making this sound so appetizing. Amoebas and brains. It's wonderful.
It tastes really good. While that pan heats up, I'm going to shape these a little bit better. What I like to do to shape is I'll put it in my hand and flip it over like that, right? And then give it a stretch, like let it fall under its own weight. And I'm stretching it, forming a little bit more of those strands. Always do it in one direction though. You don't want to go like both ways because then you get like a crosshatch thing, and that's just weird. The grain in meat always runs one way. And I'm just doing that a little bit. And then I'm going to start forming it, try to get it to not stick to my finger so crazy. And I want to get it semi, cutlet looking, flat-ish. You're working with dough here, so it's a little bit gravity ridden. And then into the pan. It's very sticky. Again, give it a couple of stretches, but you can see the effect that gluten has. It's just, it wiggles, it wobbles. The thinner you make it, the easier it is to cook, okay? Loaves are a whole other thing. I wouldn't do that using the method that I'm about to show you, which is the simmer fry method. But first, let me go wash my hands. Okay, while it's in the pan, what you want to do is get it kind of shaped a little bit better. See how the one is a little puffy? These do expand a little bit as they cook. So I'm trying to just kind of shape it into a cutlet-like shape. Something like that. I don't want it to be too lumpy or too much thicker. This one actually came out pretty good. This one, just want to move it around a little bit. And the pan really wasn't hot enough yet. So I'm just going to let these sit for a few minutes and start to cook. See how it's stuck there? There was no oil. All right, just because I'm impatient, I cranked it up to 5. Little bit of sizzle. Right now it looks like we're making pancakes. Just thought about that. It kind of does, doesn't it?
A little bit.
One thing I do have to tell you though is this is not a one-day event. You want to do this part today and you're going to cook it this way and then we're going to simmer it. And then you do want to store it in the fridge overnight. So if you're planning to do this today and have it for dinner in like 2 hours, you might be a little bit disappointed. You can do it. However, the texture greatly improves if you let it sit overnight. All right, that pan's getting hot, so I'm going to turn it back down to 3.5. However, What's it smell like, Derica?
It smells like chicken!
It really smells like chicken. And, you know, that's the amazing thing about plant-based food, is most of the time it's texture and then the spices and herbs and things that we associate with the food is what actually makes it taste like the food. So if the texture's all wrong, even if the flavor's right, it's like, this is weird. It's just wrong. If the texture's right, even if the flavor's a little off, you're still like, yeah, this is good. But when you nail the texture and the flavors, that's when it works beautifully. And I mean, let's be honest, chicken, you know, back in the before times, it doesn't really have a lot of flavor on its own. Chicken is just kind of bland and boring. That's why people do all kinds of stuff to it to make it taste good. You know, like put tomato sauce and cheese on it like we're gonna do. And that's a beautiful thing about a lot of the plant-based meats too, is you can do those kind of things, sauces and gravies, and put them in stews and chilies and all that. And when you do that, it gives that texture a chance to really shine, and the other flavors kind of just everything melds together. And if you think really hard, you go, okay, yeah, that's not really what I think it is. But you have to think about it. And I don't want to think about it when I'm eating, I just want to enjoy it. So don't think, just eat. So essentially what you're looking for is like golden brown and delicious, in the words of Alton Brown. Yeah, it's not quite there yet. It's a little on the bland side at the moment. So a couple more minutes, probably no more than 4 to 5 minutes per side. Okay, I believe it's now time to flip. So let's show you what these look like as they're flipping over. All right, so see, they don't really stick at all. They just kind of float around in the pan once there's a little oil in there, and then I'm just gonna give it a quick flip, or not. Ah, see, I messed it up. We're really cooking here, you know? Look at that, nice and brown. And then flip this one. Try to not make them touch like that, you know? And then I just like to give a little pat down, a little push to compress them just ever so slightly. And then we cook the other side. That's approximately the level of caramelization that you want. Anything more than that, and I'm gonna call that more like burned rather than browned. But at that point, once you have everything browned up nicely, that's when you can really, you know, like there's a crust on that. It starts to really feel like chicken. And once both sides are done like that, I'll show you the next step. Okay, at this point, both sides are nicely browned, but the middle is completely raw. That's not all that appetizing to me. So what I want to do is take them out of the pan after I give one last check, make sure they're browned. Oh yeah, they're nicely browned. This is one of those times when it's a little bit dangerous what I'm about to do, so be careful when you do this at home. I'm gonna add some water to a hot pan with oil in it.
Yeah.
Well, you can hurt the pan as well as make a lot of steam. See, if you do it careful, it's still not okay to do, but I did it anyway. So what I wanna do is crank that up and get that water hot.
So don't do that. Instead, get a new pan and put water in it.
You see why it's easier to use your stove? I only got one cooktop here, you know? So, yeah. Anyway, whoops. Don't bump the handle, because that would be very, very bad right now. All right. Remember that chicken stock stuff that we had? Or if you have bouillon or better than bouillon or any of that kind of stuff, I want to make a stock for this. So what I'm going to do is take another spoon. I'm using probably, that's probably a teaspoon at this point. A teaspoon of that and putting it into the water, okay? I know it sounds like a lot, but in reality, most of this gets wasted, really. I just end up using it as like a veggie broth or chicken broth later on. If you want to use veggie broth for this, you totally can too. I have made this with veggie broth instead of the chicken broth, and it works. It doesn't taste as much like chicken.
Now this is basically your braising broth,
Yes,
right?
exactly. See, this is the fry, simmer, fry method, okay? We did the fry. Now we got to do the simmer. And then tomorrow we do the next fry. So right now, I just want to get this water up to temperature. Basically, I just want to see it start to bubble, and then I'm going to back off the heat because I don't actually want it boiling. I just want to simmer it.
And using that broth and that lower level of heat is going to not only cook the centers, which is our main priority, but it's also going to infuse more of those chicken-like flavors into this product.
Now, at that point, you can use different flavors to add different flavors into the seitan. Like if you wanted it to be spicy, you could use like a chipotle powder or something like that into the sauce. Basically things that'll get in there is what you want to use. I've seen people use sesame oil. Soy sauce is another popular one, though not so much for chicken because it colors it too. Paprika, people even put like salt and pepper into this. I don't put salt because there's plenty of salt in that bouillon already, okay? All bouillons have lots and lots of sodium in them. This is one of those dishes that you go, okay, I'm gonna end up with some sodium from this, but I will say this, it's got to be less than using a commercial product that is made this way because they are loaded with sodium to make them taste good. All right, so our water is pretty much up to just a bare simmer, and what I wanna do is just get these back into it.
Be very careful.
Yeah, you don't wanna burn yourself, and you want them to be covered in the water, and well, broth, because it's not just water. And I'm gonna turn the temperature down, and we wanna leave these at a simmer. You wanna see some bubbling, but not like an overly active boil for about 20 to 25 minutes, and we'll be back at that point. Okay, so 20 minutes has gone by, the simmer has been happening. It's time to remove from the liquid. Oh, let me turn the heat off, put it to 0. I wanna get them out of the broth and put them into something heat resistant, like glass, because plastic could melt, they are kinda hot. And just nice and carefully let them drip a little bit.
You want to make sure whatever you're putting them in has the correct dimensions, that you're not going to squish your patties, because there's nothing worse than squished cutlets.
Yeah. And they will not stick together so much, but just get them in there. Some people like to put some of the broth in there with it. I don't know that that's really necessary. You can, it might add a little bit of extra flavor. To me, I think it makes them a little more soggy. So this is gonna go in the fridge until tomorrow. All right, so after a day in the fridge, our seitan is looking pretty good. They're firmed up nicely. They are a little bit moist because they were sitting, in their own liquid a little bit. So it's time to get to the breading. Now, one point, if you wanna skip the breading step, it's totally fine. I do it that way a lot. I'll actually say, hey, do you want me to bread these or not? And it's usually, when I ask that question, she knows I don't feel like doing it, so that's why she usually says, no, it's okay. And honestly, if you just crisp them up a little bit in a frying pan or in your air fryer, they work just as well. The breading just adds that little extra. So we're gonna do that. So to do that, you need 3 containers. One of them, I just have some white flour in, and I'm gonna add some seasoning. For that, I'm gonna use some basil. I'm not really measuring. See, I'm just putting a little basil in there and some black pepper. I mean, it's maybe like a 1/4 teaspoon, 1/2 teaspoon, something like that. I didn't measure the flour either. And some thyme and a little bit of paprika. Just, it adds a little color and a little bit of flavor. Not much flavor really, but a touch of color makes people go, ooh, it's fried. So I'm just gonna mix that up real good. And the last one, we actually have some panko breadcrumbs. Now I wanna season them as well. So I'm gonna add, wrong side. That's why it took so long to come out. A little bit of thyme. You can use basically the herbs of your choice. I mean, you don't have to use the ones I'm saying here. But this is an Italian type dish, so it should be Italian type herbs. Basil, yeah, that was basil.
Paprika.
And some paprika.
The same stuff you put in
the same stuff I put in the other one. Because, you want to season everything. It's got levels and layers. Can you put some black pepper in there, please? You want it to be really fine when you're doing the black pepper. Don't let it get, that was starting to get kind of a coarse grind. You want it to be a fine grind or else you're gonna have big chunks of black pepper and, nobody's gonna be happy. And then give it a mixy. Okay, so here's the theory behind this. These are a little bit moist since they just came out of the fridge and they had some broth, this and that. The flour dries off the outside. Then we need something in the middle here that I'll get to in just a second. We used to use eggs. We don't use eggs anymore. And then you have your breading. So you have wet, dry, wet, dry. Make sense? Right? Because dry and wet stick together, but wet and wet don't stick together, and dry obviously don't stick together. So that's why we do it this way. Anyway, for the egg stuff, I'm actually going to use an egg replacer, and this just happens to be Bob's Red Mill. It works pretty well. If you don't have this, I actually like using 1 part yogurt, and I mean like plant-based yogurt, to 3 parts milk, and it actually works really, really well, nice and thick. You can use all kinds of starches. That's basically all this stuff is. I'm just going to use a teaspoon here and some milk. I'm not really making an egg, so I don't need the exact 2 tablespoons measurement. I need enough to coat my pieces of seitan. Like that. That was what, maybe 1/2 cup? Not even 1/2 cup. And I want to mix that through. It's going to get thick. That's the idea. So it thickens up a little bit and it sticks to the outside of the seitan. This is a very small batch. I realize that. You can totally be doing this with 6 pieces or 8 pieces or 10 pieces, and then you would obviously want more of the stuff. This is probably why I don't do a lot of breaded type things. It's very wasteful if you're only doing it for like 2 people. If I was making a bunch, then it makes sense. I could, fill this almost halfway and most of it's going to get used up and I'm wasting very, very little per piece. But in this case, I'm wasting quite a bit. Just trying to get all the lumps out. A lot of lumps. Okay, we got our breading station ready to go. We even have the drawer or bucket or whatever you want to call it from the air fryer ready to go. And you don't have to use an air fryer for this. If you want to know why I'm using mine, it's because I just got it today. It came in like 3 hours ago and I already used it to make a loaf of bread and I made lunch using it. So I'm like super excited. I love this thing. We'll be doing more videos with air fryers. People have been saying, oh, I use my air fryer. And I was like, oh, we don't have one, but now we do. So here we go. Let's take our first piece. I'm just going to drop it unceremoniously into that flour. At this point, you have to determine which hand is going to do what. My left hand is going to do this part and the next part. My right hand will do the final part. So basically, I have it just kind of coated with the flour. See, I'm using very, very small amounts so that I don't waste much. I'm just going to kind of bang it against the side a little bit. Just want to coat it, but I don't need it like extra coated, because this stuff will fall off. So it's basically just to dry it up. So there we go. That's good. Now I'm going to dip it into the wet mixture. Get it nice and coated. And then into the breadcrumbs.
When you're dipping it into the different layers, you want to be kind of gentle because you don't want to knock off any of the stuff that you're trying to add on.
Take it to the breadcrumbs. And I just kind of do this and get the sides all good. And then I'm going to take the other hand. I probably did this all kinds of wrong. I usually use tongs, to be honest. I don't touch this because I got to wipe my hands off every single time I do one. So there's our first piece. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make you put them in there because it's easier for you to reach. Okay. And while she does that, I'm going to get the second one ready. You just repeat the process. Pretty simple. All right, so they're in the drawer of my air fryer. Now I just want to give them a little spray with a little bit of oil. It helps it to crisp up a little bit. Some air fryers you do have to flip the food halfway through. Mine has burners top and bottom, so I don't have to. If you don't want to use an air fryer, totally fine. You can just put a little bit of oil in a pan, just a bit, a coating, and you can pan fry these. You can fry them in more oil than that, but it's not really necessary. You can also do exactly what I just did, spray a little bit of spray oil on top of them, put them in the oven, I would say 350 degrees for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and you're good to go. I'm gonna put these in my air fryer at 400 degrees, which is a little bit hotter I'm gonna start at 5 minutes and I'm looking for them to golden up. The meat itself, is cooked. So all we're really doing is heating it through. And then there's another step to do. Be right back. Okay, so first time using an air fryer to do this, it took 8 minutes instead of 5. I was pretty close. But the next step is we want to get the tomato sauce and the cheese on there. And I'm always in a dilemma. Do you put the tomato sauce first, then the cheese, or the cheese, then the tomato sauce? What do you think?
I would think you put the tomato sauce, then the cheese, but... Yeah,
that's how they actually serve it, even though it doesn't make sense, because when you think about it, that means that the cheese could just slide right off. But, hey, I'm not going to mess with perfection, because to me, it's like the perfect dish. I just want to get some tomato sauce on there, spread it around a little. Okay, you can stop. Hit them both. I just reserved a little bit of the tomato sauce. If you want to know how to make a nice pasta sauce, we actually did a video on that, and this is basically what I'm using for this. Sorry, that was really loud. And I'm just going to spread that all around. And then I have here an open bag of Dia mozzarella shreds because, we've used it. And the servings on this are 1/4 cup, and that's probably about right for this. I don't like to go too heavy with this cheese. It's got a lot of fat in it. It's just a lot of stuff, okay? It's not necessarily the healthiest thing ever. But hey, this is a splurge meal, sort of, kind of. Although we did healthy it up a lot by not cooking these with so much oil. So that's a big, big plus.
Non più tra I farfalloni amoroso, notte e giorno di torno girando, delle belle turbando al riposo, Narcisetto a dolcino.
And the cheese always sticks in the bottom. You gotta black the packet.
That one on the air.
Did it really?
I think so.
Those of you who are fans of our other channel probably recognize that statement. Not the shooting one into the air, the whack your packet part. Yeah. Now, this needs to go back into the air fryer. If you're not using the air fryer method, you can just put the cheese on there and stick it under the broiler for a couple minutes, or sometimes the cheese will just melt on its own in the pan, or you can bake it, whatever you need to do. I like the air fryer so far. It seems very quick and efficient for what I'm doing. I'm thinking maybe 2 minutes tops. Be right back. So they're done. And as you can see, the cheese melted. They're nice and browned and crisped up. Let's just grab one of these guys out of here. This is probably gonna be the hardest part. Nope, that was pretty simple, actually. Put it on a plate here. You know what? Let me get this out of the way and we'll do the rest. Just a second. You know, and you gotta have some spaghetti, right? So we have here some spaghetti with our homemade sauce. Put a nice little pile on there. Looking good. And now I gotta take some pictures of this so I have a nice thumbnail for you guys to see. All right, so now we have our lovely plate of Seitan Parmesan, and I'm just gonna cut into it so we can try it.
Non più tra I farfalloni amoroso, notte giorno di torno girano, delle belle turbando al riposo.
All right, grab a little biscotti, spin it up, get a piece of the, whoops, caught it.
This is for me.
Yep. I'm not real good at feeding other people. I can barely feed myself half the time. She's smiling. That's a good sign. So what do you think?
I don't want to say anything because I don't want to spoil it for Brian. But that is really good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The texture of the meat is spot on. The extra crispiness from the coating is perfect.
Yeah.
The flavors of the sauce and then the texture of the pot. Everything just is wonderful.
Everything she said. This is awesome. If you like chicken parmesan, this could basically fool someone who likes meat. Like they could try this and be like, wow, this is really good, and never know that this was not chicken. So try this. It takes a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, but it is so worth it. That whole wash the flour method. We're gonna be doing more seitan videos that way. This, I just wanted to show you how you can make it into a complete meal.
But you can use that wash the flour method and batch process and have those waiting.
Absolutely.
So that way you won't have to do all that work at once.
Yep, we got it in the fridge. Once it's in the fridge, you can freeze that. You can keep them for a while, however you wanna do it, and pull them out one at a time and fry them up, cook them up, however you wanna use them.
And the treatment process, the plating process took no time at all.
Yeah, it was actually pretty easy. But hey, as always, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.
Bye-bye.